Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. I am your host, Lucas McCann. With me today, Sara Wood. I would normally say who Sara's with, but there's multiple here and I want to let her talk a little bit about that. So welcome to the show, Sara.
Hi, Lucas. Thank you so much for having me. I work at an AMC, which is MSP Inc., based out of Rockville, Maryland, which means I work with multiple associations. My primary two are the Public Media Business Association and the North American Association of Commencement Officers. I am the executive director of both of those organizations, and I'm also the deputy executive director of the Association of Water Technologies. So I don't have any shortage of work to do.
No, that's two full-time positions and roles in the in the industry. So this will be fun because Sara was very intentional that we don't overproduce the
That's
conversation
right.
here. So we're going to be very freeform, which I think is great. But I do like asking the question, Sara, how did you find the world of associations? Kick us off there.
Yeah, so I kind of came into it a way a lot of us did by total accident. I graduated. I won't give the year I graduated because that'll tip my age. But when I graduated college, I was just trying to find a job and get up on my feet and stay in the DC area and not have to move back home. And a family friend of mine said, "Hey, we have a position over here at the National Court Reporters Association. It's entry level, but you have this shiny new English degree, and court reporters care a whole lot about English. So why don't you apply for this job in the certification and testing department?" So I did, and I got the job, and I just kind of started doing the next job above it over and over again until by the time I left NCRA, I was their director of membership and marketing. So NCRA definitely raised me up, but when I graduated school, I really wasn't looking specifically for associations. It just happened to be a good fit that fit with my own values when I graduated from school.
Well, I'm learning more and more, which I sometimes do in the pre-show, but all of the similarities, Sara, between you and I. One, I also got into this by accident, although I
Of
do
course.
have some family history in association markets. A grandfather was an executive director, but I didn't intentionally seek it out in that regard. And I got
Right.
into a position where I was also wearing multiple hats and learning different things. Two, I also learned that while we're not giving the year, you and my wife went to the same university, college, and graduated a year apart, but that will be a different
All
conversation
right.
for
You're
another
going to
day.
have to tell me offline who she
We
is
will.
because it's a small enough school that I might actually know her.
It's possible. It is a small school and a great school. We'll go into that. Um, so that's fascinating. So tell me what then you found it, you stumbled in. I think that's become a common trend across the show. If
Yeah.
you don't have a family member that brought you in and you grew up in it, that's typically how we find it, or something cause based. What what kept you here with us?
So it really came down to what I want to put my energy into and what I want to have out in the world. So the thing that I love most about associations is that all of this energy that I expend, everything that I work on, is going to help someone else in some capacity. And that can be across industries, that can be on an individual level, that can be on a company level or a macro level. But I like the idea that all of the time and energy that I am spending and that I'm working on is going to help elevate someone else and helping to elevate their career or their profession. So it's a really rewarding job to be in. And I just found that I really connected to the members. I connected to the mission that they were trying to accomplish. I connected to the fact that the time that I was spending was helping them be successful. And that was really rewarding for me.
A lot of members are, that is their life, right? They're in their
Hmm.
occupation or they're running a business within an industry. And to a lot of extent, that might be the biggest thing in their life. And so, in terms of
Right.
relative significance, the association can have a dramatic impact. And so, as we didn't talk about anything pre-show. So I'll just now you're just going to be put on the spot. So,
Am I?
what are some examples in that you've had in your association career that really stand out to you and said, hey, this was impactful? We ran a program, we did this for members, that you can point to and say, hey, this is really, filling me up, emotionally, spiritually, for, keep continuing this work.
Yeah, I'll talk about one of my current groups that I work with, Public Media Business Association. they are not the on-screen talent or the producers of public media. They're the ones that actually keep the lights on in the back. And one of the things that I really connected to, especially during the pandemic, was not only getting them the resources that they needed to be successful, because we were in this really turbulent time, and I had this association full of media people on really small budgets. Public media, some stations have more money than others, and they're really reliant on public funding. So the work that we did during the pandemic to really keep them going, and also all of their work connecting to like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, trying to keep all of that moving in a way that was least interrupting to business, so to speak. That was really rewarding to see. I mean, all of my clients are really rewarding. I don't want to, they're all going to hear this now and they're thinking I'm going to be picking a favorite. I'm not picking favorites. I want to make that really clear
There
right
you
now.
go.
I'm not picking a favorite here.
We'll highlight that in the episode for sure.
But yeah, it's really rewarding just to see how there was this, I mean, we were all in a time of crisis. But during that time of crisis, we were putting in all of these extra hours, and it wasn't just with PMBA, it was with all of my clients. We were putting in all of this extra time, not just for some far off thing that we couldn't touch. These were actual people that had immediate needs, and our job every day was to go in there and try to figure out what was up, what was down, and how we were going to get through this. And while that was an exhausting experience, it was extremely rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that sort of in retrospect to that whole chaos situation, which was awful in so many ways. But looking back, the exhaustion was real. But I am also finding it very rewarding and proud to be part of an industry that I think had an almost resurgence in value to the memberships. Now there are some that didn't make it, and that's really unfortunate. Mostly smaller organizations, but I look across sort of the industry and can really point out some Harvard business type reviews of case studies on which not only did they just bring a ton of value back to the association market, but maybe more importantly, definitely more importantly, they brought a ton of value and saved some business and member organizations within them.
Yeah, and I mean, one of my other group, North American Association of Commencement Officers, they're the ones that run graduations, like actual commencements. Now, just imagine you're in March of 2020, you're at a higher education institution, everything shuts down, and you have to plan graduation in May.
Yuck.
That was just kind of a nightmare situation for all of them. So when I started working with them was actually in June, right after their commencement had just happened. And here are all of these people. We were actually seeing an insurgence of members coming in because we really were the only place where all of the people could talk to each other. I mean, if you think about it, if you're the person on campus responsible for your commencement, there's really no one else who's doing that job. Like, you don't have anyone else to talk to. So we had a lot of people come into the organization during that time because we were the only ones going like, so how are you doing this online? How are you getting people across the stage? Like, are you have cars coming up? Like, it was a really interesting time. And NAACO ended up being this central place where all this information was just getting shared at a very rapid clip.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a great example, right? About how, just the collective power of people and community just coming together. And I know we're going to talk about some of that, later in the show, but I just pointing out that example, I think is a perfect relevance of associations and how you can leverage all that information, collective knowledge, tribal knowledge, and sort of focus it in on helping an entire industry. It's amazing. So we did talk long enough pre-show that I found out you recently did a very interesting keynote, and that was probably maybe one of the first opportunities you'd had on that in that arena, in that stage, in that context. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I got to do my very first keynote presentation for the Mid-Atlantic Society of Association Executives back in June. If any of you are listening, thank you so much for having me. It was really awesome being there. But that session was originally born out of another session that I did with 3 of my colleagues. And I think it was back in the fall of 2021. we were going to another association event. We decided to drive down. Christina Llewellyn, she got her van together, and I was with Lindsay Curry and Nicole LaRujo. So if you know
I
any
love
of
this
those
story
folks.
already.
Yeah, so it was the four of us in a van, so we're already starting. We're driving down to Association Charette in the mountains, and we find that, especially as younger women in the association space, we were talking about issues and problems that we were facing that were, I don't want to say completely unique to us, but they were leadership conversations that we really weren't having in other places. And what we kind of learned from each other on that road trip was, in many ways, the most valuable part of the trip for us, because it was 6 hours down, it was 6 hours back, and we just got to spend a lot of really good time together. And there was a lot more crossover than we thought there was. So the four of us ended up doing a session at ASAE in the summer of 2022 on that exact thing. And my section really focused on what it meant to be a modern leader, how things have changed. And with their permission, I kind of took that section and turned it into a more expanded talk, which I debuted with Mid-Atlantic Society. So it was really cool to kind of see all of that come together. It was very organic, but it was a lot of fun to create.
Well, again, to put you on the spot, if I asked you, would you be willing to do that again for anybody out there that's listening? Would you do it again?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So
100%.
unintentional plug, but definitely a plug for Sara if you're interested
Thank
in
you.
that
Yeah,
in
no,
that
I'd
topic.
be happy to come speak for you.
Well, now I want to talk a little bit more about what that meant. So give us just the high level. I don't want to give away the whole presentation, but what was some of the inspiration? Maybe we'll start there.
I think some of the inspiration, at least for me, is that the way we work is changing. And it's not just a generational thing. I think some people like to blame, like, oh, it's the millennials, and now we're blaming Gen Z, and in 20 years we're going to blame Gen Alpha.
People
And
love pointing fingers.
we
Yeah.
keep having the same conversation over and over again, and I don't think that that's a necessarily productive thing to do. What I see changing are actual structures that are changing. One thing that I talk about is this idea of white tower leadership, where in the past you kind of had this Mad Men era style of there's the person at the top, they're in their corner office, and everything is the way it is. They're a little bit inaccessible. And that kind of structure that is starting to not necessarily serve associations in the way that it once did. It got us to where we needed to be, but especially with the way communities are changing, the way generations are changing the workforce, what I'm finding is that this structure of being more community driven is a lot more successful, that this inaccessibility of the top is not really serving its function anymore. And creating different systems within your organization that are more community driven are much more successful these days.
Yeah, you'd think in a market, in an industry where a lot of decisions are seemingly made by committee, that we would be, out in front of all of this, and maybe to a lesser degree we are. But I 100% agree. So first of all, Mad Men wouldn't have been a successful series if people didn't actually think there was some truth and relevance, and that's why it might as well have been black and white, just to sort of further implement that was a historical, I would say, setup. But it is changing. I see organizations that even have dual leadership, co-CEOs thinking more about succession planning. There's been a dramatic rise in the representation, I would say specifically of females at the highest level within associations. And we could point to several. I feel like if I started naming some, I'd be playing favorites. But I have some of their books over here on my shelf. I'll just say that as a point out. So I think it's so. How to tell us more about what this looks like in modern leadership?
So I'll give an example. We talk about authenticity a lot, right? Where I think sometimes people misinterpret what we mean when we talk about that, or at least what I mean when I talk about that, because there's this assumption that being authentic means you're just unfiltered all the time. And that's not necessarily what that means. To me, what showing up as an authentic leader means is being consistent with who you are in what you say and what you do, and also not necessarily holding yourself back. This doesn't necessarily mean you have to run in and talk about your divorce or what's going on with your kids. Like, we're not, you don't have to overshare, but at the same time, letting people know you isn't the bad thing that I think we once were taught it was. I know when I first started out in this industry, I was told that you have to keep everyone at an arm's length. Don't let people really get to know you. Like, it's important that you do that. Otherwise, people won't respect you. And I think one of the things that has changed structurally as a society is that people are actually more skeptical of you if you don't get to know them a little bit. That distance creates distrust, and it can create structural problems that you don't intend. So it's not necessarily one way was good or one way was bad. It's just that, especially with the rise of social media and how we see each other online these days, the tolerance for inauthenticity or people coming off like they're just giving you a line, that doesn't really fly anymore. So if you're in a leadership position, letting people see you a little bit isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, trust, what stands out in that to me, right? There's lots of
Yes.
great references in books and more about the importance of trust. Again, I have some of those over on the shelf here. And trust is something you have to build and then use, right? I want to build this relationship with you, Sara, so that you trust what I say is the truth and that you don't take it the wrong way. Because if you just start spouting things
Right.
off to people you've built
It's
no trust
important.
with, whether it's genuine, whether it's authentic, it most likely won't be taken out of, it will be taken out of context to some degree, whether you know it or not.
Absolutely. And what I found is if a staff can't trust its leader, then all sorts of problems filter out from there. So, yeah, for me, authenticity is a big theme that I touch on. And also just having really good and appropriate boundaries with your staff. And that's what helps kind of rein in that thing where, like, we don't need to be oversharing on all of our personal lives. We need to have good boundaries around that and healthy boundaries around that. But the other thing that I talk about within that is that when you're in a workspace, you're building a community, not necessarily a family. We like to use this phrase where, like, we're building a family here. This is a family workplace. And
Right.
I think I know what people mean when they say that, and I think they're well intended. So I don't want to come off saying that people who use that are doing it in a bad way. But I think it unintentionally creates a toxic work environment, because think about it. Like, for your family, I will wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I will drive down I-95 and pick you up if you're in trouble, right? That's what
Yeah.
you do for family. And
Right.
if you set up these expectations in your workspace that you are available all the time because family's always there for each other, it can create this toxic imbalance. The way I prefer to look at it is you're building a community, just like you would in your town, right? Where,
Yeah.
like, we're going to help each other out. If someone's in trouble, we pull together, but we do go home at the end of the day and we do close the door, and there is a break there. And I find approaching it that way creates a little bit more of a healthy work culture.
Yeah, I agree. And within a family, there's a much higher threshold, in my opinion, for family on what's acceptable.
Yes.
Is, my family could do almost no wrong, right? But the threshold is very high. Like, to get kicked out of my family emotionally, for me, you'd have to do something, pretty severe. Within a
Right.
community, though, you have to be able to set a standard of excellence and hold people accountable to that, because if you aren't, you're really degrading trust from everybody else in the community, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's all about building and maintaining authentic trust, not only between you and your staff, but then your staff within each other.
All right, so let's get tactical with that. How does
Okay.
that get implemented within your organizations?
Well, I mean, over time, trust is something that you can't really say, all right, here's the strategic plan for trust, execute, and then in 2 months it's there. It's one
Maybe
of
in your
those.
private notebook, but I mean, maybe in a
I will say that there are some practical things that I do in meetings and in with my staff and in expectations. Um, I always try to be really transparent with where I am on things. Um, it's important to me that everyone on my team understands the big picture and how they fit into it. I think sometimes we're like, oh, well, you don't need to know that piece because it's not your job. Well, maybe if they knew about that piece, they could do their job better, even if it's not their job, right?
yeah.
So when I try to structure team meetings or try to structure anything that I'm doing, making everybody feel not only that they know what's going on, but then they're bought into the process, then they trust that they're actually getting everything from me. And then that they trust that everyone else also has their pieces of the puzzle, right? So like, all right, you have this. I understand why you're doing it, how it affects me, but I don't have to worry about it. And that kind of helps alleviate distrust within teams.
Yeah. Tactically, I think about this quite often
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how we build a culture. I think you nailed it, like transparency um, in a work environment. So you also said you have to be, there's transparency and personal transparency where you can go a little bit far. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's absolutely correct. There is a level of, I do want to share with folks that, I'm a human. I think humanizing
Yeah.
your own brand and personality to a degree is very, very important, so that it's not just this top robot piece of people. Like you're a human, you're an individual, you have thoughts, emotions, feelings, and all that. Professionally, though, I think there's a much broader spectrum of what you can be transparent on, and
Mm-hmm.
it's 99% of it, right? I think there's really only 1% maybe that it needs to be behind the veil, thin veil, even at that, that isn't, it's mostly because it's not relevant. But
Right.
otherwise, I 100% agree. And so how do we start cross promoting or sharing within an organization, a staff association, what others are doing and what's the benefit there?
I think it comes down to how you facilitate your meetings and being intentional about the meetings that you set. What I notice a lot, and it can vary on the kind of staff meeting that I go to, there's some have a really clear set of rules of engagement and agendas, some don't. And I think a really easy thing to do is setting expectations for those meetings, kind of what those rules of engagement are, making sure people that know that it's safe to be transparent about what you're talking about. For example, transparency includes raising that flag when something is off the rails. What I always tell my teams is that if something is going wrong, I will not be upset. I will be upset if something is going wrong and you wait 2 weeks to tell me about it, right? Because then I can't help you. Like, don't hold it in. Like, if something went wrong, you forgot an email, something wasn't mailed out, like whatever it was, people make mistakes. That's okay. We'll fix it. Don't hide it. So, kind of creating that, like, it's all right if a mistake was made, that's okay. We will fix it together. And then just having that really clear expectation of this is what I want from you. This is how this is going to go, and making people feel safe in that space. And I don't like using the safe space is kind of an overused term, but making people feel like if they speak up and do share everything that's going on, that they're not going to get jumped on.
Well, trusted space. Maybe if we can just use your word, like
Trusted space, yeah.
we've now created the new term. It's no longer safe space. It's a trusted space. I
There
like
you
that
go.
term. I mean, I even have this sort of talk track with my kids, like, hey, if you don't tell me something happened, you're going to be in way more trouble,
Right.
so to speak, than if you just come to me and are honest. And you may still have some repercussions. That's not off the table, but
Sure.
I'd rather know and be able to help you deal with it. I think the same goes for staff. Like, yeah, don't hold it
Exactly.
in. Just come to me. Let's solve the problem together. I'd much rather you have that than not say there's a problem, not raise the flag, or maybe go try to solve it yourself if you maybe feel like you're not capable.
I always tell them they have 1 hour to solve it themselves.
Oh,
And
that's good.
if they can't figure it out within an hour, and if it's something that's actually bad, just come and tell me. I'll help you. It's okay. We'll
I'm
figure it
not
out.
gonna I'm not gonna challenge you, Sarah, to write an article and post that on LinkedIn for our community called the 1 hour rule.
The
And
1 hour
then
rule.
I think that's a great advice. I mean, hey, you get 1 hour, whatever the time limit is, but and if you can't after that hour, you have to bring it, to leadership and
Right.
let's do it together. But 1 hour to do it. That's good.
And with the understanding that I will not chew you out if you bring it to me, because I think that's part of this older culture that I'm trying to undo, where there's this fear of like, oh, I've messed up, I'm in trouble. And people kind of have a little trauma around that. And I try to create that space where like I'm not going to yell at you. I'm going to help you. Just come to me with it.
Yeah, there's some folks I think that have, based on upbringing, work
Yeah.
experience, they were part of a toxic culture
Yep.
where you couldn't bring these things up, and you carry that with you,
Yeah.
and it's not a good thing.
No.
It's really good to self-identify, and even if you're listening to this now, take a moment after the show to go, am I one of those people that just takes that with me? Do I have a fear that
Hmm.
leadership, and also, is that fear justified? Is that something
Right.
that
It
historically I'm
might
taking with
be.
me, or does this current leader trying to do something different? I think it's important to not only be a modern leader, as you said, but recognize whether you're with a modern leader.
Yeah. Very, very true.
What are other ways you can identify, maybe if you are, or if you're with a modern leader?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, for me, I think some of that's like a gut reaction. I gut check people when I meet them, is like, am I getting some sort of sales response from you that you're saying are you going through your elevator pitch in your head of what you think you're supposed to say to me? Or am I talking to an actual person reacting to what I'm saying? And a little bit of
Hmm,
that is intuition. Um,
sure.
but I think on a practical level, if you're on a staff, is when you reach out with a problem like that, how do people react to you? Are people clear with their expectations? Do they respect your boundaries between home and work? Obviously, we all have times where we have to work beyond our normal hours, but is this somebody who is expecting you to answer your email every single day at 8 o'clock in the evening? Or is it someone who knows that that is an exception and not a rule? Um, is it someone who you feel like you can actually, people are like, oh, knock on my door anytime, I'm available. Do you actually feel like they're available, or do you feel like they're saying that because they're supposed to say that because they're supposed to have an open door? Do you actually feel like you can walk in there anytime you need? So it's the kind of, again, back to authenticity, matching actions to words. Are the actions that people say that they're going to do matching up with what they actually do? Um, and if they don't, um, maybe there are more conversations you want to have about where you want to be.
Yeah, I think there's some self recognition throughout that process. I don't know. Maybe there are some people that are just born with that. And then there's other folks that have to work harder at that. And along the way, we make mistakes in doing that.
Sure.
I certainly say I've made lots of mistakes. I say I have lots of scars from those things. What's one mistake, Sarah, that you're willing
Mhm.
to share that, again, maybe can help our audience step over that stone that you or I stumbled on in sort of this growth leadership, modern leadership path?
I don't know. So this is one that I think relates to staff and also members in general, associations in general, and it's kind of become a cliche that we say in association spaces of meeting people where they are.
Hmm.
And a lot of my mistakes that I have made are not abiding by that. Because sometimes what we do as association people, we can see how it can be. We can see, like, this is the finish line. And if only we did this certain stuff, we can get it there. But sometimes you're dealing with a team that isn't ready to be doing that yet. Sometimes you're dealing with a membership that doesn't want to be pushed that far yet. And it's having, and this is something that I've always worked on in my career, is having that self-recognition of, all right, slow down, slow your roll, don't go so fast, actually stop and listen to what people are saying. um, I can't think of one with staff, but I definitely had an incident. I don't want to call it an incident, but it was when I first became, it was my very first executive director gig. And I tried to restructure too much with their agenda and their meetings too soon. And the very first two meetings, it went fine. But very quickly, they're like, well, we don't feel like this is the way it used to be. And like, it just started to spiral down.
Hmm.
And I realized really fast that I made too big of a change too fast, and that I should have slow walked that a whole lot more, and it would have been able to be adopted a lot faster. And I think that can be said with any sort of cultural change you're doing on your staff, that um, you can't just walk in and say, I went to a session at ASAE, I learned all these new things, here's the flag in the ground, and now we have a different culture. Like, that's not how any of this works, right? It's, you have to always bring people along with you, and while you're bringing, like, make sure they're still with you in that process. Like, you can't start like, all right, you're with me, and then you start running, and then you look back and they're still at the starting line. So
Yeah.
it's the constant, you got to check in and make sure people are still with you as you're making any sort of change, cultural or otherwise.
So That's great. I've made that mistake as well. I'll call it. So how do you now, having gone through that, you learned the lesson, so to speak? Is
Mhm.
it for you more of an issue of, hey, I really just need to cast the vision collectively for everybody and show them how we're going to get
Mhm.
there? Or is it really, I just need to roll this out in baby steps? And do you have anything today that you do, whether formal or informal, to make sure you don't do that again?
It's a little of column A, a little of column B, because back to what I was saying before, I think it's really helpful for people to understand where we're going. Um, I have a running joke with a friend of like, number one, make a plan. Number two, do the plan. And those two things are deceptively difficult to do sometimes. Um, with any sort of big change, having a really thought out plan of like the steps of how you're going to get there, sharing that with other people, and then having accountability along the way. Like, not just here are the steps, but on this step, these are the people who are in charge, and this is how it's going to go. Because I think what happens is people will get anxiety around change if they um, don't know what's coming next. So, as long as I think people are more okay with change than you might think, as long as they feel like they're taken care of. So as long as it's that kind of communication of like, all right, we're doing this now. This is what we're worrying about now, and then this next thing is coming, just so people know what they're expecting. Because most of the time, what I find is that when most uh, disagreements or when things fall apart is when there are mismatched expectations. I expect one thing, they expect another thing. Those things don't match, and then everything starts circling the drain. It's checking in all the time to make sure everyone's expectations are always the same, and that can alleviate a lot of angst.
Yeah, I feel like we've come full circle now back to transparency. In my experience, casting the plan, the roadmap, what have you, implementing something that's definitely going to be a change. If you just force that through and never explain why,
Hmm.
then it won't make sense, and people will be very resistant to it. I mean, some
Oh
people
yeah.
are resistant to change anyway. I think most people are, unfortunately. But I think it's mostly because you take a two-step process, and that really needs to be, again, informally an eight-step process.
Yes.
I'm just making up a number there, but you develop a plan, then you share the plan, then you listen for feedback, pivot the plan, and then take the plan and break it down into bite-sized pieces
Hmm.
and give everybody a role and an assignment so that they understand, this is where we're going. This is my role in that plan. I know what Sarah's doing. I know what Kelly's doing. I know what Jim's doing. And it all, transparently makes sense to get us to
Exactly.
that goal, and everybody's bought in. And that's what makes things happen. And that's how we know whether, it's also how we can measure whether we're being successful or not successful.
Sure, and it's one of those things that sounds easy on the surface, but it's taking the time to meaningfully do that that can sometimes be the part where you need to slow down. Because I know I have a tendency where I'm like, I just want to go, like I just want to go get the thing done. Let's go do the thing. And the thing that I've had to learn in my career is to really slow down, bring everybody with you, make sure they understand what's going on. Um, and yeah, it's changed the way that I've worked with my teams. It's changed the way that I kind of look not only at managing, but also I deal with members, and I've seen a lot of success with it.
Yeah. What else should we know either about modern leadership or sort of next gen, coming up into modern leadership?
Mm. So I think I've definitely reached a point in my career where I'm trying to do a lot more mentoring myself. I used to be on the other end of that, and to all of my mentors out there, thank you for being with me as I was coming up in this industry. Um, I think it's important to create space for that next generation to actually grow. What I see sometimes in organizations is that someone in their 20s or early 30s will come in, and either the old guard is threatened by them, or they don't believe that they actually know what they're doing. And there a lot of assumptions are made about that next generation of leadership. And from where I'm sitting, the more you invest in that next generation, the better off not only their life is, but the whole organization is. Because usually you have a lot of people that are hungry to learn. They have different perspectives that you may not have thought of. And I always try to think back to where I was at 25 in this industry and how I felt, and how sometimes I felt like I was just kind of being pushed aside. And granted, I'm not saying that there is something to experience does help. I'm not saying that experience isn't valuable, but what I am saying is that the next generation is part of your community too. And as leaders, we have an obligation to encourage them to grow, give them the tools and resources they need, and also give them space to go think and do things that might be new that you haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah. We're still very young, obviously, Sarah. So this comment, we'll just roll with
25
what
was last year. Yeah.
We'll just roll with what I'm about to say is, but as we gain more wisdom and experience in our roles in industry, what I found is giving up the things that we're not good at. Those are the easy ones, right? Because as you scale, as you grow within yourself, your career, your organization, you have to let things go. You have to give them up. And the things that aren't easy, but are easier to give up are the things that I'll just speak for myself, that I'm not good at.
Right.
The harder things to give up are the things that I am good at. And maybe I know I'm good at, I've been told is a strength. Mm-hmm. That is how do I let go of that?
Yeah. And I think it's sometimes having the confidence that someone else taking over for something for you that you are good at, just having the confidence to be like, this is an opportunity for them, and I'm going to step back and I'm going to mentor them in this space, but this is going to be their thing now. And I'm going to become their biggest cheerleader. I'm going to become their biggest support. And I want them to be as good at this thing as I was, maybe even better. And a sign of success for me is if they're even better at the thing when I'm done. And you're right. That's hard, because sometimes you see how it can be done and you just want to get your hands in there and you're like, I can just do this faster. But taking that second to maybe step back and work with them instead, it can be rewarding for all parties involved.
Absolutely. And I love that notion of let them be better. I mean, that's the only way we're going to evolve and grow and scale and do all those things, is we all have to be better. And if the people that are coming up in the next generation are better than us, everybody's winning.
That's what we want, right? So, yeah,
absolutely. Well, I hate this portion of the show, but I have to wrap us up.
Oh no!
But as I do, I know it goes by fast. We probably didn't even get to all the topics. Maybe we'll do this again. We could jump on and talk about this for hours, I believe. But as we do at the end of our show, Sarah, is there somebody in your network that you believe our audience would benefit from hearing from?
All right. So I'm talking about next gen stuff and mentoring. I'm going to nominate, I should probably tell him that I did this after we hang up here. I'm going to nominate Brandon Lawrence. He worked with me at MSP for many years. He actually just recently went somewhere and became an executive director for the first time. And he's a great guy, and I think he'd be great on the show.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to the conversation. And thanks, Sarah, for your time and for joining us today and sharing some of your wisdom in modern leadership.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.